So let's look at what the read preference options are. So the options are primary, primary preferred, secondary, secondary preferred, nearest. You can also use tags to, I believe, to select like which servers in the cluster you'd like to talk to. But these are the read preference options to choose from. So when we open a connection in a Mongo client using one of the drivers, we can select one of these options for connecting as a read preference. The default is primary. And the reason that's the default is that gives the least surprising semantics, right? You will get immediately consistent reads, so there won't be any surprises with stale data or things like that. Now let's think about these other options and what they mean. So primary preferred means try to talk to the primary, but if you can't find a primary query, I'll take a read from a secondary. So that's what that means. Secondary means read only from secondary. So if you want to keep the load off of the primary, that's when we would use that. Secondary preferred means use secondaries first, but use the primary if you can't reach any secondaries. I think a lot of times if you can't reach any secondaries, it might be hard for a primary to get elected. However, it could be that the client just can't reach some of these other nodes because of the network issues, and that the primary can, and thus it is really there. Or it could be that we have some arbiters, right, which don't have data. They're neither primaries or secondaries. And they're voting and helping us with consensus, so we want to go there for that reason. And finally, nearest just means go to the nearest member of the set in terms of network latency. So that means basically, go to one on my LAN in my data center if they're spread out, if the one there is up, right? So for all four of these, secondary is possible at a minimum. So stale is possible. Stale data is possible. If we look at these, secondary preferred, for this one, and this one, primary is possible, right? So for these four, secondary is possible. For these three of those four, primary is also a possibility with some probability. In fact, here we prefer the primary. It's actually likely, perhaps. Here it's unlikely. We prefer secondaries. And here it is certain that we're going to hit the primary. We're going to hit the primary or we're going to fail to connect. So let's look a bit more at when we would use what. So if you're not sure what to use the default primary. So let's try to make a list of some suggestions here. When in doubt, use primary mode. When you're in a remote data center, use nearest if you're okay with potentially stale data. Use secondary for certain reporting workloads, bearing in mind the possibility of lag. But if we want to keep expensive kind of data warehouse style ad hoc queries that take a long time to run off the primary to keep it fast for our core workload, secondary would be good for that. And nearest could also be good just for even read load. Consider nearest. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean is consider just sending all nodes load for queries, right? Because if we have a replica set here, so clearly if we use primary, we're going to only send the query to the primary. And we're going to talk the context here is queries or reads, so we're not talking about writes at the moment, which only go to primary. So if we set a read preference to primary, all our queries will hit the primary. All right, so we're certainly not evenly spreading the read load among all these servers. If we say primary preferred, once again, not an even spread. If we say secondary, it's also not an even spread. We're really going to send the read load to these two servers. So the primary, imagine we have a very read-heavy, query-intensive load. We do 100 queries for every one write, right? So I've got one write hitting here, and then I've got 100 queries or reads hitting these two nodes in aggregate, right? So that's not a very even split, right? So secondary doesn't necessarily give you a very even split. Secondary preferred won't necessarily give you an even load. Now by even I mean all three including the primary split, because if the secondaries are up, they're going to tend to get all the queries once again. if they're all down, or maybe just from my point of view, I can't get to them. So secondary preferred scenario might be I have a client here and I can reach that, but I've got some network issues to here. I would go here. So that would be good for availability if I am querying secondaries anyway. But it wouldn't really spread that load evenly across all three in this on this read heavy scenario. Nearest may split the load evenly depending where the clients are, right? So if you have a client here, client here, client here, you might get something like that, which is even, potentially. So of these options, nearest might be the most even. I don't think there's an option that necessarily tries to really optimize for truly perfect balancing at this time. So these are just things to keep in mind. So I would use these as rules of thumb. And you know, as I look at these, this is just my opinion, but I find these to be sort of the least useful of these four options. You know, I kind of like nearest because, especially for geographic, it's useful. I like secondary for analytics and getting a workload off the production real-time primary. And then I like primary by default because I get current data and I can read and write on the same connection, so that's good. So those are the three that I would kind of focus on. You know, I think if when you talk about preferreds, I mean that the good thing there is that like if the primary is down, we can go read from someone else, right? So kind of giving us that. But it's sort of like if I could tolerate reading from a secondary when the primary is down, why can't I tolerate doing that all the time? And can I really tolerate it then? Sometimes the answer is yes, but I think you have to be careful here that you don't get used to getting data from the primary 99.9% of the time. And then when it's down, because you're in primary preferred mode, you read from secondary and the data is not immediately consistent. And are you happy with that? So the issue here with secondary preferred, I think, might be a little different, which would be, you know, yeah, I want to keep the load off the primary, so hit these, but if they're down, hit the primary. This might actually be a good option if you go back to that case where we just had a client where they're all up, but it just can't see these guys. But if you imagine a situation where the secondaries are down, we're then going to, in that situation, which is very rare, presumably, we're going to dump a lot of extra load onto the primary, and the question is, can it really handle that load? So in this one, if you have lots of capacity, then it's probably fine. And if you don't, then you may get a load spike when the secondaries are down on the primary. So that would be my concern here, if any concern. And on this one, I have a very different concern, which is just, am I okay with the fact that I have eventually consistent reads when the primary is down? And that's so rare that I even notice, did I test that? So certainly they both can be used if you're using them thoughtfully. One other note is when you're using sharding, MongoS, a MongoS kind of sharding controller database router process, and you have multiple of those, and then you have a client over here talking to it will talk to the set. It understands these things. So whether you're talking directly to the set from a replica set aware driver for Mongo or through a MongoS, you can use these and it'll kind of do the same thing for you. And this read preference is a v2.2 plus thing. Before that, we were more dealing with slave OK and such. Okay, let's do a quiz. Why might we use secondary preferred instead of secondary read preference? Secondary preferred. Here's our possible answers. The primary may have fresher data and we would like to use it. The secondaries may be down to reduce load on the primary.